disasters, and more recently, the decline in African currencies to the US dollar, which is the currency of trade for fertilizer. So we are very pleased to have Tom to come and give us our framing presentation, and thereafter I will call to the stage our 6 panelists for our first session. Thank you.
Okay, it's on. See if I can. Somebody know how to put up the presentation? There we go. Yeah, I clicked ahead quite a few. All right. One of the things I think when we look at fertilizer, soil health, and adoption, particularly in Africa, is it has to be the incentive for smallholders, farmers, to be able to want to adopt and look at adopting. And ultimately that looks at the overall markets and what they're doing. So we always kind of start with what's going on globally, because what happens globally has dramatic impact in Africa. And so just to give everybody a quick snapshot, just focus on that top left graph there. And what you'll see is those 2 red bands, that represents 2 ranges in what global agriculture trades in terms of the stock-to-use ratio. So that gold line, that is the percentage of inventory we have left at the end of the year on all major grain and oilseeds globally. As you can see, when it gets up to 19%, suddenly that's a surplus. The market sends signals to the farmers, we don't need more. In fact, you create farm crises in terms of profitability. And it tells the market, we're getting long food, we're getting short food. You only got to go down 3 percentage points and you spark a food crisis, right? So it's a very narrow band that we trade in, but it's a cyclical band. So some key messages here is, we're still falling behind. In the last 4 years, we have actually consumed more than we produced, even though we've had record crops globally. So that consumption rate ticks up at 2.2% a year pretty consistently on a global scale. So every year, the food systems globally needs to produce more. Now, fortunately, when we look at 2023, which is actually just starting right now, 23-24 season, we are forecasting a projection to go back up above that 16% threshold line, which really kind of sparks a food crisis. But it's telling us we're not that far out of the crisis. So the lesson here for us is we're moving up, but we're in very, very precocious situation. How does that look for Africa? So in sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at the left graph, that's looking at total production, again, of just the major grains and oilseeds in sub-Saharan Africa versus the use. It's actually quite interesting when you look and see that the projected rate of consumption has been moving at a 3.5%, and when we look at consumption, it's actually 3.4%, or production 3.4%. So we're not trailing that far behind, and we're doing pretty well. And actually, when you look at the bottom right-hand graph, that's actually looking at the net deficit on all major grains and oilseeds, and it's quite encouraging to say that we've been around the 37 million tons for about 8 years now. This is despite consumption dramatically increasing, right? We're increasing at a rate of about 3.5% in sub-Saharan Africa. We are actually holding pace in the last 5 to 6 years against that. Now, you can say there's a significant gap of about 40 million tons, but when you look at that gap, you got to go a little bit deeper and say, where's that gap coming from? So here's the same numbers looking at maize versus rice. And when you look at maize, look at the consumption line on the top left corner versus production. We're keeping up. We're keeping pace. In fact, you can't go beyond that. When you look at going beyond that consumption line, that means you need to be going into global exports. That means you need to be competing onto the global market. So, on maize, if you want to double maize productivity through increased fertilizer adoption, the market will not allow you to do that ever. So you can put $1 billion into doubling the productivity of maize. It's not going to happen this year, next year, or the year after, unless you can get to a global competitive situation. Another way to think about it is we got a 1 million ton deficit in Kenya, right? Pretty consistently droughts. If you fill that deficit, if you increase production in Kenya to fill that 1 million ton deficit, you're going to lose production out of Tanzania and Uganda who are filling that market. So we need to start thinking about different solution sets if we want to increase the potential of African agriculture. Rice is a different story, right? So the only two major commodities we're importing anymore is rice and wheat. And there, you got to start thinking about David Ricardo's comparative advantage, if anybody's an economist history buff. Should we be growing rice? Should we be growing wheat? What does that look like? It's going to be a different story country by country. But definitely markets is one of the largest constraints we look at when we need to think about fertilizer. Now, in saying that, we just came through a global fertilizer crisis, and we got asked to think about a few thoughts in terms of what is a few of the high-level lessons we've learned. And I think first one overall is obviously fertilizer matters. I mean, the shocks we've seen in fertilizer prices did actually reduce usage. It did come down in terms of the amount farmers used this past season, and that's resulted in record increases in food prices. So ultimately, this matters. We need to make sure that we're paying attention to fertilizer. Another good lesson was coordination. Coordination works. I think we stumbled a little bit at the start, but actually getting public sector, private sector, getting all the different international institutions, local institutions, getting them around the table to say, what do we do? That actually turned out to be quite successful, and lots of good things that came out of there. Being part of the Sustain Network, we are actually very impressed with the response from private sector. And how they actually stood up to the table, not only put dollars on the table, but took significant risks in the markets. But we didn't see much policies targeted at alleviating that risk that we've seen in the private sector, yet they're a huge piece of that puzzle, not only from the international supplier level, but right down to the distribution level. Obviously, fertilizer use efficiencies. And the other bigger lessons, I would say, is incentives work, right? We've gone through a major shock to the food system. And on the fertilizer side, Russian suppliers figured out a way around sanctions. International firms figured out ways to increase production. Farmers around the world responded. We've came out of this quickly because incentives work. But we've also seen areas where incentives got broken. And so what does that mean? And I'd like to take a little bit of a deeper dive on here. And this is where I think we need to get better in projecting forward food crisis, is that smallholder farmers do respond to market incentives. This is an email exchange with one of my good friends. He's a trader out of Zambia. He's an absolute genius when it comes to southern markets. And him and I were actually talking about palm oil versus soybean oil. We're in a little bit of a debate. And then he flagged to me on the fertilizer issue. And you can see this was in June of 2022. And in June 22, he said, "Hey, look at the incentives the smallholders farmers seeing. I'm really concerned they're going to switch from maize to soybean. If we do that, if we reduce fertilizer, we're going to be long beans, and we're going to have a food crisis in Malawi 2024 of January, 18 months from now, 18 months from when he wrote the email. So we're still 6 months away from January 2024, but we can already see what's happened to the market because of the incentives smallholders seen in June. Maize price has gone up 135%, so it's over doubled in a long way, and that's in US dollars. It's over tripled in local currency. And soybeans has gone down. We've seen a 25% reduction in beans. Why? Smallholder farmers looked at the economics. They do what every farmer around the world is, and they made the appropriate choice for what they're facing. So incentives mean a lot when it comes to even African agriculture, and you can't get away from them. Obviously, this was the situation. We didn't need to go over it, but there's two problems in Malawi. Not only did you have the fertilizer price, but because they had produced a surplus, they were actually long maize, they had a historical very low maize price. I think it was around 160, 170, which is below break even in a normal fertilizer price environment. So how do we get better at understanding what those incentives are for farmers? What behaviors is that going to kick off? And then what does that mean from some of the food security challenges we have or our market growth potential? Another thing to look forward into is saying, what do we do about this? Pretty adamant that we need to start we need to prepare for the next shock. What are some of the lessons we can do from the last year, and put those into a vault, put those behind a piece of glass that says break in case of emergency. This is my first time being in the development side of the world when we've had a food crisis, and it amazed me how unprepared we were for something that's a known event. This is going to happen every 6 to 7 years. It's a cyclical business. How do we get more prepared? How do we understand what it is we need to do, who needs to be talking to do, and how do we get from it? A few things is, the availability. We've seen high levels of working capital constraint at the distribution level especially. So if your fertilizer increases by 3x, you need 3 times the amount of working capital that you needed previously. Balance sheets are already stretched. We need to be able to have support to come in there and backstop that with guarantees, such as the AFFM is working on and AFAP is working on, to say, in a time of crisis, can we have that standing mechanism ready to go to ramp up guarantees from the development to multilaterals to say, we'll backstop you with that risk. Better visibility on incentive structure is what I've talked to. When those break, when you're having a heart attack, when the market is saying do not do something that is super important for food security, is that a time to intervene? And then when we look at policies, a lot of work needs to be done around how do you actually take risk out of the system, not every day, but under those extreme environments, because ultimately it's not governments who deliver fertilizer, it's the industry. Agnes already talked about the AU Fertilizer Soil Health Summit. That's a super important point for our African leaders to step up and make their own vision, to declare their own vision for what it looks like in terms of soil health and fertilizer on the continent. The two I want to go a little bit further on is, one is the nutrient roadmap and then soil health. So when we look at nutrient roadmap, what we're looking for is to say, listen, if market's a constraint, then what is the conceivable market you can serve? What does that look like out into 2040? And what does that mean from a nutrient requirement you would need to be able to grow that food production? So it's a different way of looking at it, but it also actually frames it into what the potential is from an actual incentive structure. So this is preliminary. It's not accurate, so don't quote those numbers down. But if you take Tanzania today and you forecast what food consumption is out to 2040, which is pretty easy to do. It's population growth, there's some assumptions around economic growth, and that's pretty predictable in terms of what the demand pattern would be. Right? If you consume that or take that out to 2040, you can say this is what consumption is going to look like. What is production going to look like? It's coming down with climate change, right? But what's not baked into this number, is there's zero genetic gain. So we know Tari is going to produce better seeds. There's zero land extensification. We know farmers are going to plant more acres over the next 20 years. And there's zero agronomic gain. So this is a super conservative number. In fact, the actual amount of nutrients you'll need to 2040 is going to be significantly less once we finish the modeling work. But even with all of those other assumptions not even included, we're putting all of those at zero, and we're saying climate change is going to have an effect. By 2040, if you want to be at 110% self-sufficiency, which means you're basically servicing the Kenya market and the Rwanda market as you are today. So under the current market structure on these major grains, you'll need 50 kgs of nutrients, right? So really understanding what good looks like. We set the Malibu target in 2006 at 50 kgs. From the current market, future market potential, but the current market structure, you actually don't need that amount of fertilizer until 2040. So if your goal is to double yields, productivity, and increase Tanzania agriculture to 50 kgs per hectare, wait till 2040 or start thinking differently about what you're going to do for market potential and access. Last thing, because we only have 10 minutes, 1 minute. Soil health. This is a picture that I've shown several times, but this is in Tanzania. This was shared with me by the commercial manager at country manager from Yara several years ago. In the foreground is a farmer named Otto who has a beautiful crop. I think he said he got 8 or 9 tons per hectare off of that crop. In the background is the smallholders' fields. They're barren. They're brown. You would swear that that field was irrigated. That field didn't have irrigation. All it had was better root depth and it had better soil. That stopped a drought because there was an interim drought within the growing season. Smallholders lost their crops. This farmer had a beautiful crop. The economic cost of one drought in Tanzania compared to the cost of starting to make serious progress on soil health is mind-blowing. So encouraged to hear what the panelists have to say. Where does the innovation needed? How do we actually address this picture here? So thank you.
So colleagues, I'm going to just tell you right up front, everybody who will come to the stage this afternoon is very passionate about these things. So I didn't want to pull Tom off, and I don't know whether that was his last slide or not, but we have a very dynamic lineup of panelists, and we also want to give them a chance to share with you. But I think he is framing some of the issues that we're dealing with, particularly recognizing that our smallholder farmers are contributing to the food system and the business of food. I want to invite our 6 panelists up, and the way that we'll run the panel is that we have a set of questions that we will ask them to respond to, and then I want to make sure that actually the chairman of our board is ready, because he will come up shortly thereafter. We're going to do this very quickly. But is the Honorable Ernesto Max Elias Tonella, who is the Minister of Economic and Finance from Mozambique, is he in the house? I haven't seen him or met him. The next panelist, I'll keep going, Ms. Dina Esposito, who is the Assistant to the Administrator, Resilience and Food Security from the U.S. Agency for International Development. Please come up. Mr. Mehdi Filali, who is the Vice President, Farmer Solutions from OCP Africa. Please also join us on stage. Mr. Sven Tore Hastetler, who's the President and CEO of Yara. Please join us. Mr. Hank Van Jen, who is the CEO and President of the International Fertilizer Development Center. Please also come and join us. And lastly but not least, Mr. Patrick Heffer, who is the Deputy Director General of the International Fertilizer Association. Please also join us. So colleagues, you have heard the framing remarks, and these are all areas that you work in on a daily basis. But I want to start actually with Hank and Patrick, because one of the things that we want to know as we prepare for the summit is how can the Africa fertilizer industry be reinvented to address the unique challenges and opportunities of the continent today. And I think I will start with you, Patrick, because you represent the industry association from a very big picture, and then I'll ask the same question to Hank.
So, thank you, Michael. And here in that part of the room, we don't hear you that well. So, but I know more or less what is your question about. I would like address both the supply side and the fertilizer use side. So, according to what I have heard since yesterday, there is really a consensus that we need to produce more fertilizers in Africa to reduce reliance on imports, to reduce our exposure to future crises. We know there will be others, we don't know when. And also because African farmers, today they compete with farmers from the rest of the world, but tomorrow they are also likely to compete with other industries, especially the shipping industry, which might use ammonia as a preferred fuel to substitute fossil fuels. So low carbon technologies offer great opportunities, and here can be ammonia production with carbon capture and storage and use, or it can be using as well renewable energy, whether that's solar, wind, hydro, or geothermal energy, and there is plenty of this across Africa. And more recently, if we look even further to the future, there might be opportunities in terms of using what we call geologic hydrogen, which can be drilled and could serve as well as a raw material for producing nitrogen fertilizers. So there is potential. And what is interesting with these technologies, especially green ammonia technology using renewable, is that it can be decentralized, can be considered not only with the current model where, let's say, nitrogen fertilizer production is made largely where you have large availabilities of natural gas. Here it could be done in different parts of Africa where you have these renewable energies, and it could be done also at different scales, from small to large scale. Also something important, and that was mentioned several times, in terms of supply, is not only about fertilizers. There is a need to address soil pH, and therefore a need for the fertilizer industry to partner with the liming industry. On the fertilizer use side now, we need to be more farmer-centric. It means developing solutions that are relevant to the farmers, that will help them improve crop productivity, improve profitability, and also be more resilient. And what we see already in the fertilizer industry, and that will continue in the future, is that companies are moving from, let's say, supplying mineral fertilizers to providing plant nutrition solutions. That's not only mineral fertilizers, that can be organic fertilizers, can be microbials, can be digital solutions to help farmers apply fertilizer more efficiently. And we can even go further and be provider of farming solutions. And finally, I would say soil health. That's also something that needs to be paid due attention by the industry. Several members of IFA are involved in soil mapping, in soil testing. By the way, one of the nicest soil testing laboratory can be found in one of our member companies in South Africa. So in Africa, there are also companies with very strong soil health management capacities. And lastly, human nutrition and health. So we talked about soil health, but there is a clear link as well with human nutrition and health. And here there is a potential with agronomic biofortification by adding micronutrients, especially zinc, selenium, and iodine to fertilizers to improve the human intake in these nutrients and improve human health. Thank you.
Fertilizer potentially on the continent is particularly interesting, but all of the points that you mentioned are quite relevant. I want to move to you, Hank, because IFDC I know works globally, but you have a particular focus on the continent. In repeating the question, just to make sure that you have it top of mind, how can the Africa fertilizer industry be reinvented to address the unique challenges and opportunities of the continent?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's an interesting question. And I will not say anything more that Patrick already mentioned about the innovative power of the industry, because I think that's what is needed. And like Dr. Kalibata mentioned, the summit was foreseen in June, but now is in November. So this meeting at the HRF creates the opportunity to work together towards the summit. Because in the end, there is a direct need of innovation and collaboration between the industry on this side, where we are sitting now, and the farmer community and academia to address fertilizer and soil health as on a holistic way, to assure that mineral fertilizer contributes to improvement of soil and soil health, contributes to agriculture productivity, but looking at it from a holistic perspective. a bit in line with what Patrick said, is there is a need from the industry to look at how can you add micronutrients, microbiology, stimulants to your fertilizer, which is used by farmers, to improve your soil health. And I think that's the main request to all of you, also for the summit and for the next 10 years. How can we innovate in a local way to assure that farmers have access to nutrients, which are maybe locally produced when we look at manure or other local sources of nutrients? And how can we add mineral fertilizers available mostly from abroad to assure that there is higher productivity? And like Tom Keogh said, our 50 kgs, which we stated in 2006 in Abuja, luckily we still have 20 years left to assure that we can use 50 kgs in average. We are now roughly at 19 in Africa. So we still have some time to build up to 50 kgs. But also the thinking of 50 kgs in Abuja 2006 in comparison to what we think in the summit 2023 is changed. So there are opportunities for different nutrients, different sources of nutrients which are locally available, including the fertilizers which we bring in from the industry present here. So innovation is the power, but innovation together is the only way forward to address fertilizer and soil health. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much. And I think we're very fortunate to have two of the fertilizer industry representatives with us, key executives, one the CEO and one, again, a leading executive, to talk to us about some of the innovations that they're involved with, because one of the things that is happening is there's greater focus on efficacy from the fertilizer that is sold, and how do we increase yields in some instances with less fertilizer. So I'm pleased to ask first Sven, your thoughts on what role can innovation and technology play in transforming the Africa fertilizer industry and ensuring sustainable agricultural practice?
Well,
and Mehdi, I'll ask you the same question after. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So it can play a huge role. So I'm here as a private sector player, and I'd like to approach this from a business case point of view and look at the opportunity now related to agriculture and how we grow food, and definitely fertilizer plays a major role in that. But we have seen now how vulnerable the supply chains are. First through COVID, we see it with conflict, geopolitical tension, causing price spikes and shortages. Look at climate. It's hard to think of any profession more directly impacted by climate change than farming. And we need to de-risk the food system, and we need to grow food more places. And if you look at the big picture here now, Africa has a unique opportunity. It also stands to double the population from now until 2050. But already today there's a deficit. The food import bill in Africa is between $50 and $75 billion a year, so there's a huge captive market. But there's also the opportunity here to think about exports, and we heard that from Tom's opening remarks as well, that there is an export opportunity if we get the productivity right and use fertilizer in the right way. That's a key part of this. But then we need to think of this as a business as well. And farmers are running small businesses, so let's treat them like business people and focus on nutrient use efficiency, and also establishing that fertilizer is not fertilizer. It needs to be tailored directly to the needs of the farmer, to the crop, and to the soil, so that we add back the right nutrients at the right time, and not too much either, because then you risk doing more harm than good. And here with technology, the knowledge that previously would only be available to large-scale farmers can now be in the hand of the smallholder farmers through mobile phones or smartphones. And but then we need to have a supportive framework around that. And Sustain Africa was mentioned, which is a great direct initiative to support predictability for farmers, making sure they get the right nutrients, and also the direct impact that came from that should serve as an inspiration for how policy is created for the long term and much broader than Sustain Africa as well. And we see it every day that when we're out in the fields working with the farmers, instead of just focusing on 3 major nutrients, if you add 3-4 more nutrients, as we do in the MyCrop solution, you get a much more complex solution to the farmer, and we see the immediate impact to the yields, which again turn this into businesses. So for us from the fertilizer industry, it isn't about just pushing maximum amount of fertilizer. It's about doing it in the right way with tailored solutions, working with the farmers, focusing on soil health. Because when you get soil health for free, where you get soil health, you get so many other things for free. It's more resistant to drought, to flooding, to heat, and also to cold spells. And on top of it, you get more nutritious food. And the fertilizer industry certainly has a role to play in that, but it's one that we cannot do alone. We need to do this in partnerships across the value chains, but also with governments to get this right. Thanks.
No, excellent. Thank you for that. Mehdi, I'd like to have you share with the colleagues the work that OCP is doing in terms of innovating both with the product, but also in helping some of the SMEs that are part of the value chain for distribution. Please.
Yes. Thank you very much, Michael, for the question. Please enable me to answer to the question about reinventing, how to reinvent.
Can you hear in the back? I just want to make sure. I think you just move your mic a little bit closer to you.
It's better like this? Okay. So I was saying, please enable me to answer to the question about how to reinvent our industry.
Please.
I think if we take at global level, I think we have to shift our paradigm. We have to transit from extreme intensive farming to new sustainable models. And those new sustainable models should have soil health at the center of those models. For sure, at Africa, we are not at this level because we are suffering from low productivity. But I believe that we should do a shortcut and apply directly those new sustainable models based on soil health at the center. To do so, we should apply a scientific approach. First of all, we should understand our soils and their complexity. What are the needs of our soils? What are the cycles? What are the constituents of health of our soils? Then, so for that, at OCP Group, we are investing heavily in digital soil mapping to understand first the needs of our soils, and we have been conducting digital soil mapping in 50 million hectares across the continent with our international and local partners and research institutions and universities. And also we are investing a lot in integrated soil health management approach by working in various programs in more than 10 countries that are developing solutions that are targeting more than 90 million hectares of integrated soil health management in terms of finding solutions to acidic soils, finding solutions to high salinity soils, improving the biodiversity of soils and microbiome. And this is, for us, the first step to get an efficient fertilization. Then when we get all this knowledge about the soil, we can develop the efficient fertilization through various approaches. One of them, it is the 4R, right nutrients, right place, right time, and right rate. And this combined with a customization approach, bringing just the needed nutrients of the soil and the crops, enable us to increase the productivity. And we have some examples with our demo plots. We have been conducting just this year 5,000 demo plots across the continent to disseminate all this good agronomic practice. We have been noticing an increase of yield between 20 to 40% in crops like maize, rice, and potatoes in Rwanda, in Ghana, in Nigeria, and in Ethiopia. To emphasize this, when we combine this 4R and the customization approach with integrated soil health management, the increase of yield can be even much higher. And we are noticing an increase of yield that can exceed 100%, for example, in teff, in Ethiopia, and also in maize, in rice, and in pine nuts in Côte d'Ivoire. So for us, this is the best way to reinvent, let's say, our industry to support the food security in the continent in a sustainable way.
No, thank you. I think from your remarks and some of the conversations we've had so far, because as we plan for the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit 2023, we have looked back at 2006, and I think one of the big differences is this greater concentration on soil health and the impact of soil health in terms of creating the yield. So appreciate those remarks. I'd like to have our last question posed to Dina, and you've had a chance to hear from the colleagues. In what ways, because it hadn't been mentioned, it kind of was mentioned in Hank's presentation about the private sector on this side of the lake, if you will, and then the global private sector. But in what ways do you see the private sector being able to collaborate with governments and also international organizations toward driving investment and innovation in terms of improving Africa's fertilizer industry?
Thank you so much for the question, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel with our private sector, international organization, association partners, social enterprises. This is the kind of partnerships that I think we're talking about to deliver on the vision for the African Union's Soil Health and Fertilizer Summit and Action Plan. USAID is a development agency. We invest about $1 billion a year in our Global Hunger Initiative, which is called Feed the Future. And Africa receives more than any other region of the world of those resources. About 45% of that money each year comes here. And while that's significant, it pales in comparison to the problem set. And so we really see our role as first and foremost helping governments create the right enabling environment that incentivizes private sector, and then working with private sector to address market failures and de-risk assessments, investments through a whole variety of different kinds of public-private partnerships. And so I wanted to answer your question both kind of looking back at the onset of the global fertilizer crisis after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and then kind of looking forward to the kind of recovery, regenerate, and act together. Looking back, we know that it was not only an availability problem for fertilizer, but also an access issue and a utilization issue. And we began working with OCP and YARA on our missions across Africa to try to connect their offer, their very generous offer of free or discounted fertilizer directly to the most impacted smallholder farmers, recognizing the potential for arbitrage and other things, having it get diverted. And so we began working very closely with the private sector. We combined that with a partnership with AFAP on fertilizer financing, which we've talked about is such an important, was an important gap in the system. And then also coupling it with access to other kinds of vitally needed improved inputs, because costs for all inputs for farmers had gone up. So improved seed, improved advisory services, the financing, digital technologies, and we bundled all of that together in a crisis response program we call the Accelerated Innovation Delivery Initiative, with the goal of reaching 6 million farmers through 2 cropping seasons, the one that's passed and the one that's coming, in an effort to sustain crop production and food security on the continent. And that's how we got to know Sustain Africa, which is a partnership, I think, of everybody here on this stage and many others, was really an innovation in its own right to bring together partners to address this crisis, not just relying on humanitarians to deliver a solution, but recognizing the importance of development actors in this space and providing this donated or subsidized fertilizers in a really smart way without distorting markets and getting it out to farmers. So we're really pleased to be able to announce $5 million today to Sustain Africa for this last phase. It's not something that needs to be around all the time, but it's super important that we get the lessons learned right, what worked, what didn't. How do we put on the shelf a rapid mobilization mechanism so we're not mucking around and losing a lot of time the way we did, I think, the first time around. And really recognizing that early warning, early response is not just a humanitarian issue, it's a development agenda, and incorporating risk into our investments becomes so important. So that's kind of on the looking back side. On the looking forward side, AID is really focused on these issues of if fertilizer is available, how do we really facilitate access and utilization? We really came to understand as we reflected on the problem that those farmers who are using fertilizer on the continent were often using 2 to 4 times more than they actually needed. And that really comes to the fore when you don't have a lot of fertilizer, right? How do you use it more efficiently? And that those who did use it were getting a very poor return on their investment. The productivity was just really not there. And so we do intend to invest significantly in soil health and fertilizer use efficiency. We have in the past, but this really becomes even more central. As you've said, it's really the crisis. If there's a silver lining to the crisis, it's that it's really built a huge amount of momentum and consensus around this very issue. And now we have the Soil Health and Fertilizer Summit, which gives us all the moment to come together with a collaboration and a coordinated plan. We are, as part of our investment there, we'll be talking more about it there, scaling an approach that we call space to place, because it combines geospatial technology, soil mapping, improved soil mapping, with on-farm knowledge and advisory services, very much as you've described, that OCP is one of many organizations that actually have come around to it. They may not call it space to place, but it's an approach that's coming across the continent, and we're committed to scaling that approach in 4 to 5 agroecological zones in partnership with governments and all of the folks here and beyond, really to get the right fertilizer in the right amounts, in the right place at the right time, to improve the value proposition of using fertilizer and improving productivity. Ethiopia, as you've mentioned, is already scaling this approach because it has been demonstrated to reduce fertilizer wastage by up to 80% and improve on-farm productivity. It is combined with this integrated soil fertility management approach because we know that just the fertilizer alone is not delivering on what's needed. And so it's an important integration of approaches, and one that private sector fertilizer companies, development organizations, social enterprises, and more are really looking at. So we invite others to join us to make investments that contribute to the Soil Health and Fertilizer Action Plan, to come to that meeting, but even more importantly, to stay on to figure out how we're going to get a broad coalition of really diverse partners together to deliver on the plan, because it's a very integrated, it's not just about soil health or fertilizer use efficiency. It's about finance, it's about trade, It's about policy and regulatory reform. And so it will take a broad coalition of partners, and we're very much looking forward to working with all of you on that.
Thank you very much. I am mindful of time because I know that there are probably questions, and I would have liked to have a second round, but I want to ask you all to give a round of applause for our first panel. I'm going to ask the panel please to return to their seats, and I'm going to actually hand over to the second moderator of the session this afternoon. And just again to frame this for you, the theme of the second session is soil health in food systems, feeding a growing continent. And to handle these duties, I'd like to invite Dr. Natrenga Sanginga. Many of you may know him as the former Director General for West and Central Africa of SEGIR and the former DG of IATA. I learned this morning that he is soon to be the Special Envoy for the Feed Africa Summit, so I'll give him a present title. And of course, as I mentioned, he is our board chairman of AFAP, so we're particularly proud to have him come up. Thank you. Round of applause.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sanginga, and as Michael said, the former DG of the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. I retired 6 months ago. And just like the former Prime Minister of Tanzania indicated, him being the chairman of the Presidential Advisory Council of Tanzania, 2 weeks ago, I was nominated to be as well the chairman of the Presidential Council for the DRC, DR Congo. But here I'm going to, thank you. And I'm a soil scientist and worked for a long time at IITA. In the 80s and 90s, there was a kind of ideological divide in terms of soil science. There's a group of people who thought that Africa has to use low-input agriculture. And I remember, as a scientist, even a soil scientist at IITA, during those periods in the 80s, we were almost prevented to use fertilizer in our research. And we spent almost 20 years working on agroforestry, organic inputs. And a group of us, I think Dr. Van Looy is here, we thought that was wrong, that was putting Africa at a wrong step. And I approached Dr. Adesina, who was a scientist working at Rockefeller Foundation. During that period, in 2006, we went and met President Obasanjo. And he asked us a very simple question: why are we not using fertilizer in Nigeria? And the answer was, even at IIT, we are not doing research on that because they are using low inputs. And we organized a summit in Abuja, and the recommendation became quite clear that we had to use not only 50 kilograms of fertilizer, but it has to be combined to some organic inputs. And there, I think the idea of integrated soil fertility management took place. And 17 years later, we are going to organize a summit, which is called Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit. I was with President Obasanjo yesterday, and I tried to explain to him what we are trying to do, and asked me a very simple question: Dr. Sanginga, can you define soil health for me? And I'm going to ask my panel, basically to explain, if they have to explain to my grandmother what soil health means and what's going to be the impact of soil health on her small plot, it will be a very interesting question, and I'm sure some of the presidents would like to basically have an answer to a very, very, very simple question. And here I'm just trying to prevent that we, again, get taken by ideology. For talking about agroecology for the moment, you don't know exactly what they mean. So it will be very good for the summit that is really coming, that we speak. We have a common definition of what fertilizer and soil health mean and how we can measure that. So I would like probably for this panel to invite the speaker. The Minister of Rwanda is going to give us a keynote address. Please welcome, Honorable. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, all protocol observed, a very good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here to represent my country, Rwanda, to this important continental conference on food systems, and particularly on this session regarding the critical role of soil health in the food system. I, first of all, would like to thank the host country for the great hospitality and the warm welcome we received so far. We all recognize that soil health is an essential part of the agriculture sector and hence the core to our food systems. It represents the foundation upon which our crops grow. Our livelihoods depends on that, and our continent's food security is built on the soil health. It is more urgent than ever to reverse soil degradation and tackle its effect on food systems. Soil health and food security are intrinsically linked because soil health, healthy soils, if I can say that way, are the lifeblood of crop production. They provide the essential nutrient, structure, and water retention capacity that enable us to grow the food we need. I think I'm trying to explain to your grandmother. That's what the nature of soil health. However, in our African food systems, we are still vulnerable. Our food systems are still vulnerable, and the soil degradation threatens our ability to meet the rising demand for food. So as we look for the future, we must take stock of the immense challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in our quest to feed a rapidly growing continent. If I may give the examples of my own country, Rwanda, soil erosion is still one of the most serious environmental problems because many catchment areas in Rwanda are being affected. About 45% of the nation's arable land is exposed to high erosion risk. This vulnerability to erosion has detrimental impact on agricultural productivity, of course. The challenges are real and they demand our urgent attention. Soil erosion, nutrient depletion, contamination, and the impact of climate change are taking a toll on our soils. These challenges are not insurmountable, which is a good news, but they require concerted efforts and innovative solutions. Among these solutions are the strengthening of the erosion control techniques. I think the panel will go into details, but the promotion also of smart climate agriculture, conservation agriculture, techniques that preserve soil health and fertility. We need to secure land tenure, launching effective education programs, strengthening extension services, establish national soil information systems, and fostering international technical and scientific collaboration. In Rwanda, we are trying to do some initiatives. For example, when we trying last year, 2022, we tried to roll out conservation agriculture techniques, where we do minimum tilling of the soil, where we have initiated the demo plots of conservation agriculture among all 500 sectors of our country. We are breeding fertilizer blending plants in Rwanda, where we'll be able to fertilize the soil depending on the nature of the soil. We are introducing soil testing, and the future use of organic fertilizer will be based on the nature of the soil so that we don't harm. We will be bidding on the soil what the soil really needs. And we believe that this October we'll be able to start this business because our fertilizer blending plant is being completed in a partnership with the Rwanda fertilizer company. We do together with the government of Morocco, OCP. And we believe this will be a game changer for our soils as long as agriculture is concerned. We also try to mobilize our farmers to use more organic fertilizers and develop or be able to manufacture their own compost from livestock to make sure we do complementarity, because not only organic fertilizer the mineral organizers will not make it until we combine with the organic fertilizers, and that our farmers have the capacity and the capability to make. We are trying to promote water efficiency, water use efficiency, and very recently we have graduated the first cohort of university students who were doing conservation agriculture in our Institute of Conservation Agriculture. That is 3 years old in Rwanda. They do conservation agriculture, they do cropping, they do value addition, they do poultry, they do dairy processing, and all in a conservative way. So we are sure that together as a continent, we must tap into the opportunities that the continent is offering to make sure we conserve our soils. We must also formulate, revise, and implement policies and actions towards healthy soils for sustainable agriculture. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, let us remember the critical importance of soil health in our pursuit of food security. This is both a matter of national and continental security. We should commit to this cause unreservedly. Our actions today will shape the food security landscape for future generations. I urge, therefore, all of us to work together, share knowledge, and implement sustainable practices that will ensure the future of the continent. Let there be food on the African continent. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellency. Yeah, so I would like to call the panel, and I'll start with Dr. Bernard van Looy, the Deputy Director General of Research for ITA. Can you please come on board? The second panelist will be Dr. Tilahun Ahmad, the head of resilience and climate and soil fertility at AGRA. Dr. Joe Cornelius, CEO of Bill and Melinda Agriculture Innovations. Yeah, please, come on board. Dr. Leg Ann Winawoke, she's the lead for Coalition for Action on Soil Health at ECRAF C4. Come on board, please. Mr. Nico Jansen, the Program Manager of Agriculture Livelihoods at IKEA Foundation. Come on board, please. Dr. Teresa Numbi, the CEO of Dodoma Cement. Come on board, please. So I'm going to proceed differently. I'm not going to ask questions. I would like you to speak from your heart. You are a specialist. You heard the minister. You know the topic. And please give us advice. And remember, if you were in the presence of the president of Tanzania, and you have to explain how she is going to invest in soil health, what will be your speech? And if you have to speak to my grandmother as well, how would you convince her that her small plot will get benefits from your soil health? So let me start with Bernard Van Looy, and we go in a series. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
You have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Sangingo. If you ask me what is soil health, I will refer to 4 properties: soil organic carbon, available P and potassium, good soil pH and water stable aggregation. Now, of course, if your grandmother did not study agronomy, she will probably not understand what I'm saying now. So I would tell your grandmother a healthy soil produces healthy crops. Yeah, that's what I would say. Now, if you would allow me to spend 1 more minute, I was really happy to hear Tom talk about agronomic gain. Yeah. 15 years ago, we talked about fertilizer use, about nutrients, about crop yield. Now we are 15 years later, now we talk about soil health. It took us 15 years to go beyond nutrients. But there's 2 other really key aspects that I think we need to absolutely take on board when we talk about the next level of investments and not wait another 15 years to add them. It was mentioned already, but I want to stress them. One is the resource use efficiency. I think Dina mentioned it and a lot of others. It's not about whether we have 50 kilograms of nitrogen used or not, or whether we move to 100. If you use the current 50, double as efficient as it is today, with 50 you'll get double yields. So we can still do much more even with the 50 we have. That's the third thing. The resource use efficiency also refers to water and labor. We talked about mechanization, about Excellency talked about water use in Rwanda. I think that's the third dimension. And the fourth dimension is climate adaptation. We referred to it also a few times. But agronomy and all the work we are talking about provides excellent entry points into dealing with climate adaptation. The CEO of Yara referred to it also. So within our Excellence in Agronomy initiative of the CGR, we are conceptualizing agronomic gain around those 4 dimensions. And my recommendation would be to take those 4 recommendations equally seriously when we move into the next level of investments as the result of the soil health. So that's what I wanted to contribute, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Yeah, I will start by advising her to invest on land and water management issues that are very expensive or beyond the reach of a farmer. For example, degraded soils which are not responding to inputs are very expensive. So, for example, managing acid soils. Or as the minister said, managing landscapes, minimizing erosion, bringing critical inputs from distance, particularly, for landlocked countries. So there are some critical inputs, interventions that are beyond the reach of the farmer, that the government has to support. But also issues related to policy. For example, land tenure policy, ensuring that, farmers have the confidence to invest on their farms and their landscapes. But also making sure that, the extension system is strengthened, the capacity is created, so that farmers have access to information, but also to critical inputs, including last mile delivery systems. So these are really issues that are beyond the farmer and are requiring an external intervention and the policy support.
I've been a farmer my entire life, and it's amazing to me that over 10,000 years, we have not had the ability, capability, resources, or tools to actually enhance and improve the single most important natural resource on this planet. We are fed by the soil. We are clothed by the soil. We are housed by the soil. The water we drink, the creatures that we cohabitate with are all nurtured by the soil. And now is one of the most exciting periods in history for science and for farming, because we are actually seeing a convergence of agriculture and biology with math, engineering, robotics, in ways that were never before even imagined. We're now seeing tools that actually allow us to be able to phenotype for roots below ground. Think about this. Every tree you look at, half of it is out of sight. The biomass of this planet is what we walk on as well as what we eat and what we sit under. And these tools not only allow us now to actually be able to start selecting for genotypes and ultimately seeds and traits that are more drought tolerant, but agriculture is now at the forefront of all these planetary challenges that we're facing. Agriculture has scale. Agriculture is renewable. Agriculture is local. And agriculture can make significant progress towards our improving soils. Every 1% increase in organic matter results in a 12% increase in productivity. And half the fertilizer we apply to soils is lost either to the atmosphere or to water. We can improve the ability of crops through genetics to actually be better stewards of the nutrients that they have access to. We can make crops that actually are deeper rooted, can access nutrients at a deeper profile. We can create roots that actually are able to sequester carbon deeper and build carbon reserves in the soil, and ultimately advance not only the needs of smallholder farmers, but also the needs of society in general. Thank you.
One thing you taught me is to always speak from the heart, so I will continue to do so. So I'm Lee Winowicki. I'm a soil scientist at World Agroforestry based in Nairobi, but my career in soil health started here in Tanzania, working with Seliani in Arusha. So I'm so pleased to be back here and to share some of the insights I've learned. And building on what our speaker just said, soil is so often overlooked. And we all have a real duty and responsibility to make sure that is no longer the case. In fact, I'll take my 3 minutes for us to reflect on Tom's photo. That photo of the barren land, the degraded soil, eroded soil. It's estimated that over 30% of the Earth's surface is degraded, meaning that soil can no longer provide vital ecosystem services, carbon sequestration, water purification, and of course what most people at this conference have been focusing on, nutritious food. So now is the time, soil health is on the agenda, to start building healthy soil ecosystems. So I want to just reflect on 3 principles. 1, we must do everything we can to stop further erosion, to stop further degradation. Let's make sure the next IPBES report comes out saying we have decreased erosion globally. 2nd, we must give back. We keep taking from the soil without giving back. Dr. Lal says soil is like our bank account. You can't keep withdrawing from it. You need to give back. And the 3rd principle is building on what you said. We need to start thinking of soil as a unifier, as this entry point for climate action, climate change mitigation, and adaptation. Building healthy soil ecosystems contributes to ecosystem restoration. Many African governments have committed to AFAR 100 to restore ecosystems. Finally, biodiversity. Soil is the most biodiverse ecosystem in the world, and we can really use soil to contribute to all of these goals, including food and nutrition security. So that means we must work together urgently. And remember, building healthy soil means we're building a healthy planet.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Zanginga, for the challenging question of how to explain to our grandmothers, or maybe our children, what soil health means. I was last year on a trip in Kenya where we were talking with farmers about soil health. And a rice farmer said to me, after working in a program that we support on soil health, he says, "My soil has gotten lighter." Well, can any scientist explain what that means? We couldn't. So I think also there we have to build a lot on what is still there in indigenous and local knowledge about soil health. Because before fertilizers were there, farmers also knew how to sustainably grow crops. Yes, population has increased. Yes, we're asking more. So I think we need to turn the question around also of fertilizer and soil health. I think we have to talk about soil health and the role of fertilizers in maintaining soil health. And to listen better and more to people working with the soils on a daily basis on what that means for them, and work together with them as scientists, as development community, in finding the better innovations, the better answers. I'm very pleased to hear also the Minister of Rwanda say, that we see an important role of organic matter, of organic fertilizers, of fertilizer in the circular economy. Why is it that we're trucking on a daily basis enormous amounts of organic matter into landfills where we leave it to rot? Where we could, with a bit of innovation and some investment in that innovation, maybe look at how can we turn that back into the soils where it originally came from. So that's also where we as IKEA Foundation are supporting partners to work on those innovations together with farmers, together with scientists, and together with investments to develop the business cases for that. And I would also like to call out, in a way, to governments in the African countries to look at this and to look at how can we create a level playing field for those kind of innovative products, and not just make the subsidies that are there available for the synthetic fertilizers, but also for the organic-based fertilizers, so that farmers are capable of affording them and finding the right mix of organic and synthetic fertilizers to maintain their yield, to maintain their soil health, and to be able to provide the healthy crops that we need for our healthy diets. Thank you.
Opportunity, and I'm here to preach about the lime and gypsum story. So what I love about it is since you said we need to be natural, I think let us consider soil as human body. We as human need the importance of supplements. So when we talk about soil amends, such as agricultural lime which amend acidity. They're like supplements. They're very important, and once you use it very effectively, you're going to have a very healthy body. So from that angle, and I've been for the past like 5 years, we, the Dodoma Cement, we have been investing too much in providing solution whereby where there's acidity, we do sell and manufacture agricultural lime, and where there's alkaline, we also provide agriculture gypsum. However, for the past, I'm just talking about the past 5 years, there has been a very low appetite. By 2020, we were able to reach to almost 50,000 smallholder farmers. So in terms of knowledge, they are aware about what is required for them to prosper in agriculture activities. However, their appetite of applying or using lime to their cultivated land is still very minimum. And as a result, they don't see value in whatever they're aiming at or in their production daily. So what we think and what I recommend, I think nations government, they need to amplify on the use of these soil amends, because they are very vital to especially to smallholder farmers. We as the Dodoma Cement, we don't feel a bigger challenge when it comes to commercial farmers, whereby they know exactly what they're supposed to do. If I recall you back to the picture displayed by a presenter from Melinda Gates, you saw there were two farms. One, it might be somebody who is very knowledgeable on the importance and proper application or proper adaptation of these soil amends. But the other smallholder farmers, which was back behind, somehow, somewhere, they lack this kind of knowledge on the importance of this particular supplement. So to us, we see and we need our government to amplify on the better use or on the importance of using soil amends such as agricultural lime for them to get bigger results. Not only that, and for the smallholder farmers, we also need to understand that they listen to what the government says. So this also calls on capacity building to extension services. Most of the private extension service officers are well equipped when it comes to proper adaptation of soil amends. But when it comes to government extension service, these are the people who live with smallholder farmers, and these are the custodians of smallholder farmers. Do we take time to understand what kind of language are they speaking to smallholder farmers? So I think a lot needs to be done to ensure that more capacity building is given to extension officers, especially from the government side. Not only that, I also believe in local content, whereby as African, we also need to invest and promote locally investors that are providing solutions to the continent. I can also speak to Dodoma Cement. Currently, there is a need, for instance, in Tanzania, to have proper investment when it comes to granulated lime, which is a little bit more effective in Tanzanian perspective, as well as it's cost less compared to the rest of the lime. So what we need as a private sector as well as the government, we need to support this solution provider, especially that has a local test, because we understand what the local needs. And not only that, another thing that I think we also need to build on is to support people who are dedicated when it comes to soil health agenda. I can be very sure that a lot has been done with people like Sagot, whereby Sagot and other partners, they have initiated a place whereby we have customized agriculture agronomy for agriculture line. So that means if we support people like Sagot and the rest of the developing partner to preach something about soil health, I believe that we're going to reach the soil vision the health soil vision that we as Africans we are demanding. And another thing that I also need to pose as a challenge is that we always speak about soil acidity and we forgot about soil alkaline, which is also another challenge that most of the irrigation schemes are facing in Africa. So as we envision on how to protect and promote our soil health, we should also provide a mechanism, a solution, whereby we're going to amend with soil lime as well as agriculture gypsum so that at least smallholder farmers to increase their appetite to the fertilizer. Why are we saying this is very relevant is because you might use 1,000 of fertilizers, but if you don't treat your soil, you're not going to get appropriate results. So we need to combine soil amends with fertilizers, gossip that at least smallholder farmers they can easily get a test as well as to see tangible results in the investment that they put in agriculture. And that's why people like Dodoma Cement, we are here to serve our smallholder farmers with the best agriculture lime as well as the best agriculture gypsum. That's what I can say for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to ask you just an advice to President Kalibata, who is organizing the Fertilizer Summit. If you have to tell one thing that we should not do in everything we are talking about, that what could be that? To say, don't do this, otherwise you're going to be in trouble with fertilizer and soil health. Just 1 minute for each person. Let me start with Bernard and with you, Teresa. Just one thing we should not do.
We should avoid using new terms, new terminology that describes the same thing. I'm often wondering, the speed with which new terms are invented is faster than the speed with which maize yield increases in Africa. It's not about regenerative agriculture, it's not about agroecology, it's not about ISFM, it's about the practices. As my colleague from the Dodoma Lime has explained very well, it's about the practices that people can use, adapt and respond to all those points.
Tilaun?
Don't rush. It's a process. It's a very slow process. Carbon build-up in the soil takes years. There is a need for transition. There's a need for investments, and farmers are very risk-averse. So somebody has to share the costs, the benefits. So it's a process that should come along with support. So don't try to push everything overnight.
Yeah, next.
So I would suggest that we invest more aggressively in breeders and breeder technologies so that they can bring forward seed platforms that actually will benefit smallholder farmers, benefit soil health, and provide the ecosystem services that are necessary.
I would say let's not make the same mistakes we've done before. And specifically, we need massive investments in soil health monitoring to fill these gaps. At C4ECRAF, we've been leading systematic soil and land health assessments, coupling it with participatory and assisted citizen science tools to engage farmers, landowners, pastoralists to monitor soil health so we can finally fill those key knowledge gaps that people keep complaining we have about how land management influences and impacts soil health indicators.
Yeah, thanks. I think I would recommend don't forget to invite the smallholders, the SMEs, the innovators to the table to talk about future-proof products that we can have and need to have to sustain our soil health in Africa.
Imagine he has just stole my idea, because I had the same idea that, Madam President, don't forget the smallholder farmers. They're the best testimonial of what needs to be done, because like they are the ones that are going to tell us why are they not adapting the situation. And the last one, don't forget the correction for alkaline in Africa is still a big problem. Thank you.
So let's give a round of applause to our panel. So I'm going to call to Mr. Sunga, the CEO of Southern Africa Confederation of Agriculture Union, to come and give closing remarks for 5 minutes. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thanks very much for the panel. I'm not thanking them on your behalf, but I just wanted to echo the last two voices about the representation of those that are at the center of what we're talking about, which are the farmers, predominantly smallholder farmers. It's indeed a privilege for me to say a few words. I'll speak from my heart as well. In any case, I'm not a scientist, so I got no option other than to speak from my heart. And just to make a few observations to try and echo some of the sentiments expressed here, but also give a different perspective, maybe a different interpretation. I think the first point really is sometimes statistics lie, or they don't tell the truth, or somewhere in between. You hear that the average usage of fertilizer is this per hectare, or the average yield is this per hectare. But really, is that the correct average we're talking about? If you are going to be aggregating zeros and zeros and zeros together with larger numbers, is that a really true reflection of the average that we really are talking about? If most of the farmers are farming to eat, not farming for surplus, they are not driven by a productivity and efficiency model, can we really batch up all those numbers and say this is average? Shouldn't there be another way of calculating what the average is? Not only in terms of fertilizer use, but also in terms of yields themselves, because you're looking at a gardener, you're looking at someone who's farming to eat, and some of them who are semi-commercial, others commercial. You all lump it up and you come up with an average that can be embarrassing, to say the least, when you project it to the outside world. So let's be careful about what is it that we're using to measure. That speaks to the point of that farmers are not the same. They're widely differentiated. Just to repeat, some farm to eat, it could be more than 60%. Others produce surplus by accident, some by design. Others sell everything they produce. So it has to be horses for courses in terms of fertilizer or soil health sort of discussions. It makes me wonder also, what is the value proposition of soil health improvement, which might be a long journey, to someone who's waiting to get away, run away from agriculture at the very earliest opportunity? How do you sell it to them? To say, invest in soil. But that's not their business. They want to ship out quickly, as soon as possible. So, but there must be some creative ways of still achieving that end of soil health. Perhaps it has to be tied to some safety nets, some payment systems that are sort of tagged to practice rather than to productivity. If you're giving someone a handout, perhaps they also have to do A, B, C, D in terms of soil health. It's also a complicated matter. I don't understand soil health in as much as that I don't understand baby health, or let alone animal health or plant health. And most of us don't. So we need to be careful about whether we understand what actually happens down there in the soil. It might be that we don't know. And I'm hazarding a very good guess here. Most of us don't know. And we speak as if every farmer knows that this is what happens when you put fertilizer. We know that something happens, but do we really know the science of it? There must be a way of communicating that. Otherwise, we risk talking to ourselves all the time, and we get disappointed, frustrated, and still blame the farmer and not blame ourselves, which is part of what the game is about. It's a value chain issue, in my view. It's a value chain issue. If we don't address whether soil health directly leads to the healthiness of the pocket health, in other words, or money, then we probably are going to be missing the point. How does it talk to the viability and livelihoods of farmers at the end of the day? It's not only about increased production, it is about whether the outcomes of that are going to translate into decent livelihoods for farmers. If it doesn't, it might excite us that things have improved, but ultimately, is it worth it? I don't think it is. So let's really talk about that. And in any case, if someone sells inputs, sells fertilizer, sells a product, they take their profit there and then and walk away. They are not going to wait for a season that will never come anyway because it's hit by drought, but they walk away. Is that a fair system? Don't we look at some things perhaps that we need to look at? How do we ensure that whoever is along the chain is going to pay for it as well, rather than the farmer and the banker looking at each other at the end of the day when any input supplier, including fertilizer, have walked away, taken their profits. So it has to be a different innovation in terms of how we think, in terms of how we move forward. The other point really is it's not about technological fixes only. It's about human beings, it's about processes, it's about institutions around it, it's about policy, it's about a lot of things that needs to. Sometimes we talk about how do we do self-thought in a scientific way. It is much more about the ABCs of doing things that can be understood. A lot of us, we got family members, even ourselves, who are not in good health, but we probably don't know why we are not in good health, let alone knowing why the soil is not good in good health. So let's look at soil literacy. It's important. We might think that it is not. It's not exciting for researchers, but it's a simple thing. Understanding soils is important. And maybe the last couple of points before I get stopped is this point about that whatever brought us here, let's make sure that we are not going to repeat it in the other direction of soil health. Whatever brought us here in terms of mineral fertilizer is not exactly going to be the same outcome if we go into the other direction, because there are software issues here, there are structural issues here that will need to be solved. So it's not just a change of this to that. But I quite like the idea, by the way, of increasing fertilizer production in Africa, but equally disappointed by the lack of discussions around organic fertilizer, increasing production of organic fertilizer. I've seen farms that are producing manure at industrial scale. Why are you not going for those as well? I'm not saying that mineral fertilizer is bad, but there could be other options. My final point perhaps is that it's important for us to speak together, to understand also the softer, maybe more fundamental issues that might actually shed more light into why things might be as they are now. But more fundamentally, what might be required in terms of social engineering or other forms of engineering to really give us the change that we all require at the end of the day. But I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words. Thanks.
Yeah, let's give a thank to. So, and thank you for the panel once again. Please clap for them. So I would like to invite the President of Agra, the former Prime Minister, and there's two ministers who are there to come to the podium for a picture with the best panel today. Please come over for a picture. All the panel, please. All the panel.